starving artist Waffle Espresso Bar in downtown Toronto. And we're excited today to be here to meet Jamie Gold, a dad who left his high-priced job in downtown Toronto to stay home with his son. We're really excited to meet Jamie, and we can't wait to go inside and try the food. So I hope you'll come with us and we'll have a great time. Jamie, thank you so much for coming today.
A pleasure.
I'm really looking forward to talking to you. This is an interesting topic to me. I'm sure it'll be an interesting topic to a lot of people.
One of my favorites.
So, I'm sure. Well, you were a high-priced lawyer.
I was a Bay Street lawyer.
Okay.
I still am a lawyer. You never stop being a lawyer. My son was born in 2000. Around 3 years old, he was diagnosed with PDD-NOS, which is a subspecies of autism.
Okay.
I think they're all the same, so we call him autistic. We call him Toby, by the way, but he does have autism.
That is his name, yes.
That is his name. And I realized that I needed to get up to speed on Toby very quickly.
Okay.
Partially for my own sake, partially for his, and partially for my wife's.
Was there a problem? I mean, you were working long hours, I'm sure.
Not only long hours, but the type of law I was practicing involved stress, involved confrontation. I was a litigator by trade.
Yeah.
So
a lot of stress and a lot of confrontation.
It was, and what I found was, in the first couple of months after he was born, I noticed I was coming home, 7, 8 o'clock, if I was lucky, and I was still aggravated. I was still heightened.
Was that causing strife between you and your wife, too?
Not so much. She was used to it. I'd been doing it for a while. Toby came after we had been married for 8 years.
Oh, that's great.
So we had a great time together. But what I found,
built that relationship, so
absolutely, and she also wanted to get settled in her line of work and find herself, and that made sense to me. But what I found was in the early days, I'd come home and she would say, "Here," and pass me Toby, and I would still have that.
You couldn't shake off what you had going on at work.
Exactly, and as much as I wanted to be with him and be present for him, I still had that it's what I'll call residual anxiety, tension, and I was up and that's not what you want to do with your kid. One, when you just have your first real encounter with him, but two, when you're putting him to sleep.
Yeah.
Because I find they feed off us
as
much as they feed off anything else.
So that was really hard. So in the beginning, I mean, you had the first 3 years. When did you decide that you were going to make that life change?
Well, Toby was an early talker and was an early reader. By 1.5.
Wow.
He was babbling away. He was reading things and repeating them, but he was repeating them in a very literal sense. So the example I give is everybody knows Dr. Seuss's alphabet.
Yeah.
Big A, little A, and he's alligator.
Yeah.
And he would say that lots of times.
Okay.
And then one day,
a lot of repetition.
And he wasn't necessarily bonding with anyone other than us. He would want to talk to you about little A and his alligator, but he wouldn't necessarily bond with you in the way that I thought might be normal, and we'll get back to normal soon. But
just he wanted to focus on that one thing and didn't want to...
Whatever.
No emotions involved in it, basically.
Well, he was very emotional with us.
Okay.
But whatever turned his crank was what he wanted to talk about, and he wasn't necessarily forthcoming in accommodating what you wanted to talk about, be it grandparents, be it other kids in the play group, or be it other adults.
So you were picking up on that early?
Exactly. And at the beginning, I thought, wow, I got a gifted child here. This kid can read, this kid can talk. And then two things happened. And it happens... There's not only two things, but it's gradual. But two things. One is we watched a movie, a Winnie the Pooh movie, and he said to me afterwards, "Pooh's honey pot broke," and he was almost weeping.
Wow.
And I said, "Toby, what are you feeling?" And he said, "Pooh's honey pot broke." And it didn't go beyond that, but it took me a couple of minutes, and I realized Toby's sad, and he's telling me in an off way. So Toby developed the habit of speaking in tongues, as I call it. The second thing that happened was we were out at a social engagement, a bunch of families there, kids of all ages, and there was a child there who I knew had autism. And the two of them happened to be at what I will call the train table at the same time. And I watched them both do this.
Just repetitive over and over.
For more than a moment.
Yeah.
And bingo, if I understood something was up, I didn't understand what was up. Now, like Toby, I am cursed with the ability, once I think something, I do not unthink it.
Yeah.
And it stuck with me. And being the litigator that I am, I delved into the research very quickly, realized we had something special here, and reached out, as I often do, to somebody I thought had more expertise. We had him diagnosed
Okay,
at
so-
about 2.5, 3.
So is his friend a doctor?
This was a doctor,
Okay.
a friend of mine, who referred me to a psychologist.
Okay.
The psychologist told me at the time, we went through the testing, and it's tough to test a 3-year-old
Yes.
or a 2.5-year-old.
Yes.
For a variety of reasons, typical
course.
or not. And if this is the line where to this side we have a diagnosis, to this side we don't. Toby hit the line.
Yeah.
And the doctor said to me, I don't know what to do with this. And I said, I know what to do with this. I want the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Why did I want the diagnosis? I wanted the diagnosis so I had a vocabulary with which I could discuss with teachers, with others, as well as accessing
And
whatever.
also to get on that learning curve that you knew you were going to have to get on.
And as well, there's services out there. We can debate the quality or the availability of them, but there are services out there, and I needed a way to access them, as well as a vocabulary. Where
there's occupational therapists.
there's occupational therapists, there's speech pathologists, there's physiotherapy, there's behavioral terapy. There are dozens of things out there, some of which are reported widely in the press, some of which are panned in the press, and some of which are just relatively unknown, or at least not yet readily accepted.
Yeah, there's therapies that are accepted, there's therapies that haven't been accepted yet, and there's therapies that have just been...
And then there are things that just plain work, that have absolutely no scientific background. The one I like to refer to is throw my kid in the pool.
Yeah.
My kid loves swimming. It's horrific to see him swim in the sense that his strokes are weak, they are not beautiful, but he stays afloat, and there's nothing happier than Toby in the water. So my sense was, I know nothing about this. I'm a reasonably intelligent guy. I learned the vocabulary. I surrounded myself with people, and I did whatever they told me to do.
Okay, so now you're in a situation where you're kind of making a decision too. So you know that you've had all this stress, you have this diagnosis, you've delved right into it.
Yes, I mean, one of the things reasons I delved into it is you worry about the future. I will say this to any father, any mother, anybody considering having kids, don't sweat the future. Any more than you shouldn't sweat the past because you can't take it back or undo it. Never sweat the future because it will drive you crazy.
Well, you didn't really sweat the future at all. I mean, you just dove in and said, okay, I was living this life. Now, now that my son's born, I want to be more involved. I'm going to change and do this life. How did that transition happen?
It happened? I was actually quite lucky. I had always been moonlighting in another business. And at the time, we were selling the business. So lo and behold, Toby is diagnosed, and I sell out of the business, so I'm now reasonably cash flow comfortable for a period of time, which allowed me to take a leave of absence from the firm. The joke is, with my former partners, I'm still on leave of absence. It's been now 12 years, 11 years, and I'm still on leave of absence is the joke. For me, it was time to focus on something else. One, I needed the break. I've been practicing for a dozen years. My view is everybody should have a break, a sabbatical, and just see the world. And so we did that.
Oh, so you traveled as a family?
No, we traveled before. This was pre-Toby. But I've always been a believer of, after a couple of years, clear your mind, get out and do something different. Toby gave me that opportunity again at a time when I had recently become more financially comfortable. So the idea was take a little bit of break, learn about Toby, and more importantly, help the wife. Now, traditionally, I'm not a traditionalist. Traditionally...
Well, you and your wife were both working?
We were both working. I was working a more standard job, corporate job. She was working for herself. She's an artist and designer. She worked from home, but she also had to be out occasionally. And what I found was, it was unfair for me to leave her with the child for 8 to 12 hours, come home for an hour, pent up, full of tension.
Still not paying attention, but not really paying attention.
And again, to put it frankly, raising any kid, particularly your first, raising a kid with special needs is a shit-kicking, excuse the French, where you don't have any experience, you worry about absolutely everything. So for us, it was a question of get up to speed, learn what we have to do, collect the expertise we need, and let them tell us what to do. Now, I don't get told what to do all that well.
Sure.
But this was a case where I had really no choice.
Yeah, you had no expertise and you didn't have a lot of knowledge and you probably never even thought about it.
No, the only thoughts I had was how can I support my friend who has a special needs child or other friends who have special needs childs, but they're all different.
Yeah.
So what I learned from my experiences with my friends in context one didn't apply to me, except for the empathy, being calm, and other such things.
What did you learn about yourself being at home? I mean, especially with Toby, like, I'm sure your life is very different and you've been used to this work that, you know, took all these hours and coming home. Now you're a little more relaxed, you're at home, but now, you know, you have other stresses. How are you dealing with
Things
that?
are very different. When I was working downtown, I was in a big office tower, I had windows, I had support staff.
Yeah.
You know, I was one of those masters of the universe types.
Yeah.
Where things just happened, I was doing high level work and it was interesting. Too much work, mind you. But
You could probably snap your fingers and things would get done.
They could. Again, there were supports available. Once you start working for yourself, which I do now, and which I started to do then, and once you are outside of that environment, you become self-reliant. Yeah. And you realize that there's a whole lot of things you need to do to keep afloat in any endeavor that you don't want to do. Yeah. So in the context of Toby, it was one thing for me to get up to speed, collect, the team, and become what I'll call a human resources manager. Yeah. It was another thing to learn that I have to do these routines patiently, calmly.
And many times by yourself.
Well, it was the two of us.
Yeah.
Now, my wife and I are very different people. My wife.
How did that go over? Is a great question.
In the context of Toby, my wife loves being told what to do in detail. Yeah. I hate being told what to do in detail. I want the broad general principles.
Just let me go.
And I'm not a fan of routine. My forte is what I will call, thank you so much. It's called open field running. You have a play, you have a playbook, and it doesn't go well. Yeah. Then I start to improvise, and that's what I love to do, and that's what I do exceedingly well. There was no doing that here, because Toby needs consistency, Toby needs routine, and he needs to understand expectations in a pretty black and white way.
And you can't deviate at all, really.
Well, you're going to deviate.
A little
Let's
bit,
be clear. You're not going to do the same thing in the same way, and when Toby says something off script, I'm going to run with it. Yeah. I love that part of him, and he's amazingly interesting and adept at that. Yeah. But again, in the early stages, it really is about attention, compliance to a degree, and applauding, the most mundane things over and over again. Yeah. So I moved back into the house. I have a home office. My wife's home office is on another floor. So it's not like we're 24/7, thankfully. And I say that in jest, but I also say that really. What we found was, given that we have different aptitudes, attitudes, and strengths, me being home was wonderful for her because I could take the load off her on those things that were not her strengths or her desires. At the same time,
which is perfect.
I could give her an hour or two, an afternoon or a day of respite, in the same way she could do the same for me.
So you weren't butting heads because you realized that you have different skills and you wanted to take on your challenges and she was taking on her challenges.
Oh, don't kid yourself. We butt heads all the time.
Well, but not as much as some other people might.
No, partly because we had a renewed common focus. Okay. So in any relationship, you're going to butt heads. I'm a litigator. I butt heads for a living, so my natural disposition is to cross-examine and butt heads. Yeah. And
you don't mind confrontation at all?
No, I love confrontation. Yeah. I hope to do it in a respectful way that works towards a common resolution, but, naturally I am a verbally aggressive, in-your-face type guy. Yeah. She is not. Okay. So, but what we found was with the common purpose, it was a matter of, okay, what do we need to do? Who's better suited? Who needs the break? And what can we do together to make the burden on any individual much less? Because I know from experience, anecdotally, that these stresses can be relationship killers. And as we'll talk about, I'm sure, if you have a spouse in the house who isn't happy, the house isn't happy. Yeah. And your kid's going to know it, no matter what challenges he or she has.
Yeah, even if it's gritting your teeth, you still feel it.
There's no bullshitting your kid. Yeah. No matter what the challenges are.
Oh, I know. Even with a 4-year-old, I know.